This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 11th of October 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with international broadcast correspondent and former CNN Europe editor Nina Dos Santos. Then,
it's about leaning into not just seasonality in terms of the fruit or asparagus or, something that is hyper-seasonal, but also what people want to be making that precise time.
Food writer Olivia Potts talks autumn cooking. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, the news. Thousands of displaced Palestinians began returning to the ruins of their homes on Friday as a ceasefire took effect and Israeli troops withdrew under the first phase of a deal to end the war. A vast column of people trekked north along Gaza's coastal road towards Gaza City, devastated days earlier in one of Israel's heaviest offensives of the conflict. The United States reignited its trade war with China as President Donald Trump announced sweeping new tariffs and export controls on Friday in response to Beijing's curbs on rare earth mineral exports. Trump said Washington could restrict Boeing aircraft parts and impose 100% tariffs on Chinese goods by the 1st of November, ending an uneasy truce between the world's two largest economies. And French President Emmanuel Macron has reappointed Sébastien Lecornu as Prime Minister just days after his resignation, a move that's enraged opposition parties. Amid France's deepest political crisis in decades, Lecornu must deliver a 2026 budget by Monday as Macron faces mounting calls for new elections or his own resignation. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm joined in the studio by Nina Dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and former CNN Europe editor. Nina, you're looking very glamorous for this time of the morning.
Oh, thank you. I think I'm putting my brave face on the world because what a week it's been. I mean, we started out with the likes of Sébastien Lecornu, the French Prime Minister, becoming the shortest-lived French Prime Minister in the history of the Fifth Republic. And now he's back. So, for me, this is just Groundhog Day again. And I'm trying my best to keep a brave face.
And what else have you been up to this week?
Well, I'm preparing for one of my biggest challenges yet, which is straight after leaving this studio, I'm going to the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is part of the University of London, to start learning my seventh language, which is Arabic.
Fantastic. That's amazing. What a great challenge.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I really believe in is that to understand what's happening in the world today, often it does help to understand cultures and languages firsthand. And so I've long wanted to try and learn Arabic. I haven't had much success with other languages like, for instance, Russian or Mandarin that don't use Latin alphabets. So this time I'm really going to have to buckle down. But I'm really looking forward to the challenge.
And which brand of Arabic, so to speak?
I'm going to be doing Modern Standard Arabic, which is more sort of, classical Arabic that's spoken in parts of the Middle East, like, say, Egypt and also parts of the Gulf as well. One of the main reasons why I'm embarking upon this challenge is largely a sort of competitive battle I've had of minds with my husband, who does speak Russian, and I don't. But he grew up in the Middle East and never learnt Arabic. So I want to get a march on him.
That's fantastic. I met somebody yesterday from the Falklands. I'd never met anybody from the Falklands before. He's the, I think, really quite famous explorer, Messon Bound. He found Shackleton's ship Endurance. And he would start a sentence somewhere midway in California. By the middle of the sentence, he was in Ireland. Then we got a little bit of Australia in there.
Must have taken him long to get to the point.
It was hilarious, but he was so fascinating. This was at Cheltenham Literary Festival, which began yesterday. You might see my snazzy pink wristband.
I did spot it, actually.
And because I'll be back later in the week to chair a million events. But yesterday were these explorers. So it was Messenbound, Mark Frary and Anne Strathy. And so the books are Wonders in the Deep, which is the book that Messen has written with Mark, and then A History of Polar Exploration in 50 Objects. So it was so interesting just finding out about all of these wrecks and how technologies, affected it all and everything. Anyway, so Cheltenham started yesterday. It runs for 10 days and it's so exciting.
Is it 10 days nowadays?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's become a big jamboree from
it's a
where it
long
started.
time, yeah. And that's why I just couldn't be there for the whole time. I do have this job to do as well. But I'm going back next week. And the one I'm really looking forward to is Tim Berners-Lee.
Of course.
The man who invented the internet. And so I think that's just going to be absolutely fascinating.
I interviewed his mother once about when she noticed his promising abilities intellectually, and she was fascinating. She came into the studios at CNN aged 94 with her daughter-in-law, Sir Tim Berners-Lee's wife, who I believe is American. And she was utterly lucid. She would talk about maths problems, aged 94. She was such an inspiration. And I suppose it just goes to show that, you can have all the abilities in the world, but you also have to have examples of parents who, can give you the opportunity to try and use those abilities to do something great in the world.
Well, thank you very much. I shall now make sure I ask him a question about his mother. So, Nina, let's turn to the news because it's grim, but it's getting better, at least in Gaza.
For now, yes, that's right. So obviously there was this deal on Thursday that was struck between Israel and Hamas, brokered very heavily by the United States, to engage in a ceasefire and to agree to certain terms and conditions as per this very long and complicated 20-point long plan that was agreed upon in the Oval Office a week or so ago, or at least let's say proposed in the Oval Office a week or so ago between Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and Donald Trump. Hamas has signed on. The Israeli troops have rolled back into certain positions, but they still occupy about 53% of the Gaza Strip in this first initial phase of withdrawal. This deal foresees the release of the Israeli hostages. It's believed that 48 are still in Gaza, 20 of whom are still thought to be alive within 72 hours. But if you look further down the lines at some of the points that are more complicated, that appear to have been glossed over for now, this is still a very, very fragile situation, I think.
Absolutely. And I think one of the problems was that they're just not sure where all the hostages are.
That's right, particularly when it comes to the remains of the hostages whose bodies are set to be returned as per this deal. They may be ensconced in all manner of tunnels that could have been targeted and imploded by the IDF in its actions in Gaza. And also, there are a few things that could scupper this deal or risk scuppering this deal further down the line. From Israel's perspective, imagine how public sentiment might change when the hostages eventually are seen on camera. They could be extremely emaciated because, of course, there's a famine going on in Gaza, a famine that has, according to the United Nations and other bodies say, is totally man-made at this point. And also from the Palestinians' point of view, there's some doubts over the makeup of this proposed transitional government, whether it includes enough senior Palestinian figures. The question mark over how exactly Hamas would disarm, who they would surrender their weapons to. They say that they want to surrender them only to a viable, recognised by them Palestinian government. That's another fierce point of contention that has to be worked on from here on.
Absolutely. Let's turn to this extraordinary situation in France. Well,
Déjà vu was invented by the French, and boy, are we thanking them for that this morning, right? I woke up early on Monday morning dropped my children off at school, went to a school event and immediately got a phone call from the BBC saying, can you get in 15 minutes and do several hours of analysis on the fact that Sébastien Lecornu, the 39-year-old French former Armed Forces minister, who then became Prime Minister, has resigned, and he resigned only 20-odd hours after nominating his new cabinet over the weekend, but his government collapsed within just 2 hours. And that gave him the unfortunate accolade of having been the shortest-serving French Prime Minister in the history of the Fifth Republic, which began in 1958. Now, not only is he that, he's also a two-time runner sequentially, because he's been renominated by Macron. And the other parties inside the Assemblée Nationale, and even some of the ones who were amenable to being part of the previous three governments we've seen the last 15 months in France, are just aghast. They just don't understand what Macron is up to. This is obviously a salvage attempt to prevent new snap elections from being called, but it's looking as though he's going to have to.
Well, I bet Liz Truss is relieved.
Yes, that's right. 40-odd days in office. Sébastien Lecornu only made it to, 3 weeks in office, but he's back. He hasn't actually had to leave.
Yeah, but this is dependent on whether he can get a budget together by Monday.
Indeed. So the plan here is that he will be presenting that badly needed budget to rein in the 5.4% deficit that France has, about 3.3 trillion euros worth of debt. That's an existential crisis, not just for France, the second biggest economy in the Eurozone, but for the whole of the EU and the single currency as a whole. So there's a lot riding on this for France and for the rest of the Eurozone as well. But the logic here is that instead of previously where he said when earlier on this week he resigned, he blamed other parties for not willing to compromise at all when they were part of the government temporarily for a few hours. Now he says that they're going to have this debate out in the open in the Assemblée Nationale. But the far right, Marine Le Pen's National Rally, hasn't been consulted on these government negotiations. The far left hasn't either. And they have promised to immediately torpedo this government with a motion of no confidence. As yet, the question is whether or not the socialists would sign on to that motion of no confidence. Olivier Faure, their leader, has said, well, it's not a given that we won't try and bring down this government. We're holding fire for the moment, but it's looking very, very tenuous, I must say.
I was speaking to somebody who lives in Paris yesterday, and I said, why do you live in Paris? Because he's half Italian, half Swiss. And he said, because if you like politics and you like books, it's the most exciting place to be, which I thought was absolutely right. He is, in fact, Giuliano de Empoli. So he is this Italian-Swiss political thinker and a novelist. He advised Matteo Renzi when he was Italy's prime minister, and he's become one of Europe's real sharp observers of power. So lots of people know him from The Wizard of the Kremlin, which was his portrait of Putin, which of course then was made into a film with Jude Law. His new book, which is what we were talking about at the Cheltenham Town Hall yesterday, is The Hour of the Predator, and it explains how autocrats and tech billionaires are reshaping global power. It's actually France's best-selling non-fiction title, I think, ever at the moment.
Really? At this point? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's such a scary book. But he was so articulate about it. But, you know, there are some things that when it comes to tech giants, and of course he went into many of them, that defy explanation. For instance, Peter Thiel and this rant on the Antichrist.
Yes, that's right. He's given a series of lectures in San Francisco that were ticketed, by the way. I think you had to pay $200 to go for one of these waterfront lectures. You were not allowed to take notes. You were not allowed to record any of it. They weren't public. They were strictly off the record. Why one would want to go off the record if you were trying to proclaim that the Antichrist is coming and the end of the world could be nigh, I don't know, but somebody did actually record some of them and gave some of the details of what he said to The Guardian. And I have to say, I've read The Guardian's take on it. I've read The Times' take on it. I've read various other takes on it. And I can't figure out what he's on about. This is still a man, though, remember, who a number of years ago wrote a very controversial piece where he claimed that the problem with democracy in America is that the franchise was widened towards women and minorities. And so whatever he says, I find quite hard to swallow from a personal point of view as a female 25-year career journalist. I just think that, obviously people like him have had a lot of financial success, and as a result, there's a lot of people who want to listen to what he has to say. But The Guardian appears to be saying that much of what he was extolling here and spouting forth on was rather incoherent and difficult to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that phrase.
Thankfully.
That phrase, the Antichrist, I mean, it's extraordinary. And of course, this is the time of the year, we're just dipping into darkness, aren't we? It's getting much darker here. And Halloween is coming up, typically time when we think about things like the
Spooky indeed. Yes, you're right. And The Guardian was saying, for instance, we still don't know who the Antichrist is, according to him. It could be the US, quote, it could be Greta Thunberg.
Oh dear. Well, certainly at this time of the year, it's all sorts of things like Guy Fawkes, for instance. It's autumn, and I've got to tell you, there was a fantastic weekend last weekend. A handful of Monocle editors that's hosted a weekend in the country for some of our beloved readers. So lots of four-wheeled fun supplied by Range Rover. The rolling hills came courtesy of the Cotswolds, and the conversations were started by our contributing editor Robert Bound and Monocle's design editor Nick Manise. So a standout guest was the food writer Olivia Potts. This is relevant because we're talking about autumn and we're talking about seasonal foods, which is what her big thing was. She has a column in The Spectator and her book is Butter, a Celebration. So Rob began by asking what signals nature gives us that we're heading into autumn.
I mean, it's hard to see past apples, let's be completely honest. But there are other things. I mean, we are in prime quince season. But what you need to do with a quince is you chop it up and try not to chop off your own fingers at the same time because they really are very hard. And then you stew them. And when you stew them, you can use them just as a fruit. They become tender and crucially, they become pink, which is extremely pleasing. They have no pinkness in them raw, but they will go pink when you cook them. And you can have that in a crumble or a trifle or, any of our gorgeous English puddings. But you can also make quince jelly as a condiment. And then if you're a real masochist, what you can do once you've made the quince jelly, you take all the pulp and all the pips and the bits that you would imagine you don't want and you sieve them. And it is the worst job in the kitchen. I cannot recommend quince sieving to you unless you have a lot of time and a really good audiobook on your hands. But if you do that and you sieve it all through and you get this paste, you cook that up with sugar and you get quince paste or membrio. And it feels magical because it feels like nose to tail cooking.
That's the thing. We love all the things of the summer, but we kind of come into the days getting shorter, and there is something where cooking perhaps becomes a bit more ritualistic, a bit more of a sacrament. It becomes a weekend activity that isn't about playing tennis, it isn't about running around and doing whatever you might be doing in the summertime, right? What's the rhythm of your kind of food year, and how does it change when you get to this time of the year, I wonder?
I think this time of the year, I know that we have made the shift when I start making soup. Well, first of all, it's when I want to start standing over a stove for several hours without feeling like I'm in some kind of Bikram yoga session. And secondly, it's when I'm looking for not just those comforting flavours, but the comforting textures as well. That softness and creaminess and voluptuousness that you get with sauces and soups and slow cooked casseroles that really are synonymous, I think, with our British cold cooking.
Your weekly column in The Spectator is a great joy. You're obviously a brilliant writer. How seasonal do you want to be with that column? You obviously can't repeat yourself year after year. You need to kind of, one year it's pairs, one year it's medlars. So tell us about, I think people would be interested in the journalism of doing a column like that.
It's been going for quite a long time now, I think 6 or 7 years since it first started. So I write under the heading of The Vintage Chef. So the idea behind it is always that it is classic British recipes. The platonic vintage chef recipe to me is probably something that you ate in school 20, 30, 40 years ago and you maybe think is a little bit gross. And then I'm going to tell you that it's actually the most beautiful dish you've ever eaten if you make it properly. The very first column was blancmange. The thing is, blancmange, there is literally no difference between blancmange and panna cotta. They are the same dish. But if you were presented with a panna cotta, you would think, oh my God, how chic. And if someone said, we're having blancmange for pudding, you'd be looking for an exit route. So I like this idea of rehabilitation of dishes that have either been lost or really had their reputation damaged. But yeah, so I think like it's about leaning into not just seasonality in terms of the fruit or asparagus or, you know, something that is hyper seasonal, but also what people want to be making that precise time. Because actually, if we think of what we make at Christmas, most of what we're using is not seasonal because it's all dried. And you also have the additional problem that if you want to make it really gorgeous, you probably want to be making it in spring, or you want to have, you know, if you think of the Christmas puddings you buy from the shops, 24-month aged, 36-month aged. So it's not much good if I'm telling you to make it a week and a half before Christmas Day, because that's when it's seasonal. So it's about balancing all those different things.
I want to ask you a question about butter as celebration. And butter's one of my favourite things. It presumably goes in and out of favour. Why did recently feel like the right time to maybe pull butter out of the hole or celebrate it when the going was good?
Well, what I would say first of all is that even in its high time, and I think we kind of are in a butter high time now, it's still something that makes people very nervous. It makes publishers very nervous, it turns out, because butter just means fat to so many people. We thought that the Mediterranean diet was the be-all and end-all. So we sang the praises of olive oil, but we thought that butter was the scourge of cooking. And it's only recently that we've sort of rode back from that and looked at the data that seemed to suggest that the Mediterranean diet was such a cure-all. The data was very cherry-picked in a way that was bad for butter, but also just incorrect. I wanted to write the book as a sort of rehabilitation. And it also gave me this, like, all I really care about with recipe writing is people understanding why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting in a recipe. It's always either flavour or this will make your life easier. Like that's always the answer. And butter felt like a really good way into that, because butter can do so many different things. It really has this ability to transform, you know, the proportion of butter in pastry will take you from a savoury short crust right the way through to a laminated brioche. What you are doing there is just changing ratio. And I love that ability to like really dig into that and tell the reader, this is why we're doing this and this is why we're using this butter in this way. It felt like when I started cooking at 24, 25 and I like discovered butter. It really did feel like that. It felt like a world opening up. And I say in the book, if you have ever eaten something delicious in a restaurant and thought, why does mine not taste as good at home? The answer is butter and sometimes salt. But if you're using salted butter, it's just butter. Like, that is the answer. And I wanted every single person that I could get to know this, and just fought the publishers until someone said, yeah, all right, we can publish it.
That was Olivia Potts in conversation with Robert Bound last weekend. Now, I've still got Nina dos Santos with me. Nina, of course, butter in moderation is good, but if you eat it so much of it that you become the size of a house, that's a problem for most people. But there is one group of people for whom being enormous is actually a huge advantage. And I'm talking here about sumo wrestlers.
That was a fantastic segue, by the way. You can tell you've been doing this job for quite a long time. Brilliant. Yes, sumo wrestling is coming back to the UK, and it's coming back to the building where actually I graduated 20 years ago at university, the Royal Albert Hall. It was last here on these shores for a big tournament in 1991, and that was the heyday of course, you know, Japan being a huge burgeoning economy. People wanted to learn Japanese, not Arabic, like I'm going to learn after this show. And it kind of fell from grace a little bit in the international standing and also, you know, interest here in the UK. But the promoters of that tournament back in the 1990s are back with this big show-stopping tournament and event that will be taking place in this famous location in South Kensington near the Museum District, if anybody knows London. But they've had to do quite a few things to make sure that this ancient Victorian building is able to accept these very heavy wrestlers. They've had to reinforce toilets, they've had to reinforce chairs and floors, they've had to bring in 1 ton of snacks for them. That's not the meals. That includes 700 kilograms of rice, 1,000 packets of instant miso soup, 1,050 rice balls and 750 packs of instant noodles, just in case they get hungry between some of their bouts of wrestling. There's a great piece in the Times I would recommend for anybody today, which shows all the different moves if you want to practice.
And they also had to bring in special soil.
That's right. Yeah. Well, actually, they found the loam soil that they needed in Kettering, so not far from London, but apparently they went on a mission across the UK to find the exact right type of soil, and they're compacting it as we speak and leaving it to rest until the performances will begin.
Now, you've given us a fairly comprehensive list of what sumo wrestlers eat, but I wonder what they drink, because if they're using local produce or local drinks, it would possibly be whiskey, which of course Japan is very well known for. But now we're seeing that Pinot Noir is being made in the snowy regions.
That's right, on the island of Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island of Japan, and it's famous for its ice sculptures and ski resorts. It's got quite a foreboding climate in the winter where it's very snowy and icy. But that said, it hasn't deterred French vintners, in particular one famous producer of Burgundy, from setting up stall to make, as you said, Pinot Noir, using local indigenous varieties of grapes from Japan. This is quite an exciting story. The Times has a big feature on it today. Obviously, the Times has a whole bunch of features on Japanese-influenced stories today, so there's a couple more if anybody wants to check that out. And they're talking about how there's this growing appetite for domestic wines. They've won awards in Decanter magazine, and gradually they're becoming more and more full-bodied, and they're going well with dishes like, for instance, sashimi. So for anybody who doesn't necessarily want a Japanese beer or a glass of whiskey, there are some more sophisticated wines on offer. And I have to say, this story really grabbed me, because if somebody offered me a glass of Pinot Noir from Hokkaido, I would be delighted to try it. It just sounds so exciting.
Absolutely. And fast set to become one of Japan's biggest cultural exports, alongside the whiskey, the sushi, and of course the sumo wrestlers. Now, when you think about cultural exports from other parts of the world, when India comes to mind, it is of course Bollywood and that fantastic film industry that has been built there over the last decades. 3 new Bollywood blockbusters are going to be made here in the UK.
Yes, that's right. This is the upshot of a big trade negotiation and trade mission that the UK has been undertaking over the last week. We saw Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, spend some time in Mumbai and Delhi earlier on this week, and he's come back with a promise that 3 new blockbusters will be made by one of India's biggest film houses in 2026. The government statement put out on its website, the British government, claims that about 3,000 jobs will be created as a result of this, and that this will continue to support an industry that's worth about £12 billion to the UK economy. I suppose the sceptic in me might say these are largely freelance jobs. We know that the media industry, in particular the film industry, continues to suffer quite significantly some pressure because of, tax incentives that have been introduced in other parts of the world. Hungary has stolen a lot of the march on films from the United States and also from the UK recently, because of generous tax incentives to film in places like Budapest. So this is a way of the UK using its trading footprint and its links with countries like India to try and forge closer ties and use some of the infrastructure that's been built over the last 10, 15 years with these special sets, stage sets at studios to make sure that they are used, properly, and that more people can continue to be employed by this sector. Overall, the UK estimates that about 90,000 people have jobs that are tangentially linked to the UK film industry. So it is a big part of the economy here, but it is, as I said, deeply cyclical, very unstable and very insecure at the moment. I was reading a report a few days ago about how 60% of people who work in television and film are currently either underemployed or unemployed and suffer financial and extreme mental distress as a result of the insecurity of the landscape at the moment. So whatever can be done here will be helpful.
There's another link, interestingly, to Japan here, in that past Indian productions have yielded global hits. So, for instance, that cross-cultural hit Slumdog Millionaire brought in around £300 million to the UK economy on a budget of just 12 million. And the link to Japan here is that it was written by my friend Vikas Swaroop. And at the time that he was writing it, he was the Indian ambassador to Japan.
I didn't know that. There you go. Only somebody like you would know that.
It was extraordinary.
Another fantastic segue, by the way.
But he also spent time in Canada as the ambassador there, and here in Britain, where he was also writing. And now, of course, he's retired, and because he's been very senior in government, he's a fantastic resource because you could, when you need somebody to comment on Indian politics or whatever, he really, really knows his stuff. And then he's also this completely brilliant writer. I mean, that film was excellent, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And the UK has great ability to, let's face it, do something on a shoestring budget with that kind of British irreverence that Slumdog Millionaire had. And it actually captures a huge audience and ends up making a lot more money than actually went into it. Whereas a lot of American films are very big on the kind of glossy stuff, but actually the substance, isn't quite as significant, and the kind of irreverent side of British humour doesn't sort of shine through, or British Indian humour in that case. One thing I would say is that, just going back to, we were talking about Peter Thiel and, the advance of the technorati in America. This is welcome news, this news that Bollywood will be investing here, because obviously the film industry internationally is facing an onslaught from the tech world with the advent of AI, cannibalizing a lot of jobs in this sector. So it's great to see, again, cross-cultural pollination taking place and economic cross-pollination with these three big films that are coming to the UK. And they'll be warmly welcomed by the very large Indian diaspora that live here and elsewhere around the world.
Absolutely. And once we start making Arabic movies, maybe you can star in them, because by then you'll know how to speak Arabic.
Take me a long time.
Well, good luck. Off to your Arabic lesson you go. Many thanks, Nina dos Santos, and also to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan, with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. That's all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. It returns next weekend with Emma Nelson in the hosting chair. I'll be at Cheltenham. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.